Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, wherever you are in the world. Hello and welcome to the June Helicopter Investor Town Hall. Is it really just 4 months we've been locked down for? It's great to see so many of you around the world, and let's get started. We're delighted to have our first guest working ready this time. Sharon Desfor needs no introduction, the First Lady of Helicopter Valuations, Chairman of the Board and owner of HeliValue, past President of the American Society of Appraisers, and all-round helicopter expert. Sharon, how are you?
I am excellent. Glad to be here, Al, and working
Great.
this time.
I know, it's great to see you. We've got sound. Okay, let's try and be upbeat. What do you think's changed about the helicopter market because of COVID-19?
I think that what's changed about the market is the same as what's changed around the world, and that is just a general slowdown in everything. You know, slowdown in transportation has led to a slowdown in activity. Although, you know, there's still stuff going on. We have, there are deals being closed. There are bankers coming in and, you know, they want to close stuff, so they get their appraisals done. And, there was something I wanted to kind of congratulate the industry for, and that is finally the acceptance of the virtual on-site inspection. You know, once upon a time, if somebody wanted their helicopter inspected, the banks would say, nope, you've got to be there in person. And all of a sudden now, even though it came out in response to the pandemic, we're seeing that people are willing to let us use an on-site maintenance technician and do a video inspection. You know, we have our inspector. He's got his computer there, and they've got the AMT on the other end with his camera. They go through, and our inspector will direct the AMT with his cameras to, you know, look at this serial number and show me that data plate, and do a close-up of this piece of the records. So it's a lot faster, and it's easier to set up, and it's a little bit less expensive because we're not flying inspectors all over the globe, paying for their airfare and hotel bills. So, you know, I think that's a change in the appraisal industry, and I think that's going to stick. I think that the banks are going to continue to accept those. Not every time, but it's nice to have a new service available.
And that's not going to change. The world has moved on.
Yeah, the world has moved on. I mean, there'll still be a few times we got to go on site, and I think a lot of that's going to be with new clients or people that the bank doesn't know yet or trust that much yet, or where there's a suspected problem, you know.
So last town hall, we spoke a lot about offshore and, you know, the problems facing that industry. Are there any bright spots you can pick out of?
I hope so, Al. I really do. I think this is finally the opportunity for us as an industry to finally break free of our long-time reliance on oil prices and supply and demand. We as an industry have had this artificially direct relationship with the price of oil ever since Bob Suggs and Frank Lee picked up a couple of bells to bypass their muskrat breeding grounds, you know. When you think about it, there are so many more helicopters in emergency medical services than there are in offshore oil support. Then add search and rescue and corporate VIP head of state, construction, logging, firefighting, power line patrol, news gathering, movie making, seismic, ranching, tuna spotting, all those weird and wild and wacky utility operations that are out there. And those in just plain personal transport, and the overwhelming number of operating helicopters are not in offshore oil. Why have we been so reliant on oil, on the health of the oil industry to determine the health of ours? I don't know. I've been trying to ask that question for 36 years. Yeah, I'm that old. But the best I've been able to come up with is maybe the reliability of the income stream from the oil contracts, you know, but that money anymore. It really hasn't been for a decade, maybe more. And I think maybe a lot of that is the truly human way, the lazy way of taking an easy route and saying oil is down, so therefore helicopter values are down. So my bright spot, my opportunity is to say, maybe with so much riding on this, maybe this time we can finally break free from this this reliance on the oil industry to determine the health of ours.
Okay, that's great. I just wish we'd done Sharon Desfor bingo, because we could have had muskrat breeding ground, tuna spotting, all these words that I wasn't expecting.
Yeah.
Okay, you've touched on the fact that you've been in the market for a long time. You've been studying helicopters since the 1980s. What do recoveries normally look like? Now, I think everyone's pretty familiar with the past 10 years, the global financial crisis in 2006. But how would you characterize a typical helicopter upturn?
All right. Well, I mean, there haven't been that many huge ones, but there was a similar oil glut back in the 1980s, right? In 1985, 1986, OPEC had another price war, and the price of light sweet crude prices went down by more than half. It went from $29 US a barrel in 1985 dollars to $12 a barrel in 1986 US dollars. And it was also an indirect result of the long years that it took the US oil demand to recover after the 1973 OPEC embargo on the US, right? Even though the US never lost its position of the highest consuming country in the world, it still took until 1995 to reach the same demand level as we had in 1973. So now, helicopter values, because we have had this artificial reliance on the health of the oil industry, helicopter values continued to fall through the 80s till about 1988. And then we had a long, slow recovery. It did not peak again until 1991 during the Gulf War against Iraq in response to their invasion of Kuwait, if you were old enough to remember that, right? Other than ERA, U.S. helicopter operators were predominantly running single turbines in the Gulf of Mexico. North Sea operators were running Boeing 234s, Sikorsky S-61s on the heavy end, Sikorsky S-76s, Bell 212s, and 412s on the medium end. Pretty sure there was at least one 214 ST out there in the market too. I guess if this recovery goes anything like the last really huge oil glut, we could be looking at yet another 4 years until we see a reasonably full recovery in helicopter values. But as I mentioned before, I'm really hoping that we'll finally see that link break between helicopter values and the oil industry.
Although, to be fair, you said that, and then you've just only talked about oil in your history lesson.
Because that's where the link has been, right? You can't create a link that didn't exist until now.
How long do you think it will take for oil not to dominate the conversations and values?
Until my generation of my age level of people has moved on and there's a new group. I mean, I think we're starting to see it. I think you start to see a lot more people interested and invested in the medical space, in the medical industry. But I think a lot of the 60 and ups are still mentally stuck in the oil industry. Plus, a lot of our biggest operators are heavy in oil.
Yeah, I guess it's a... Okay, that's great. Sharon Desfor, president... sorry, not president. We're hearing from the president later. Chair of HeliValue. Thank you so much, and great to see you. And I'm so pleased the technology worked this time. Thanks, Sharon. Okay, we're now delighted to head over to New York. David Fowkes, Managing Director, Sector Co-Head, Aviation and Aerospace at Raymond James. The person's the same, but it's a new business card. David's got more than 25 years in investment banking and capital markets experience. He was at Seabury, Bristow, Deutsche Bank's Special Situation Group. He also worked in capital markets coverage at Lehman Brothers. Whatever happened to Lehman Brothers? I haven't heard them about them for a while. David, how are you?
I'm well, and I'm actually in Houston. I moved down here when I went to work for Briscoe. So, thank you. Great to be here. And I'm going to do what I typically do in these things. Is I'm going to walk through something that's not exactly what we want to talk about, but I think is important. What's going on in the fixed wing industry right now, and then we can talk about the implications on the helicopter world. So. Okay. Did you get the slides that I sent over?
I've got them, and I'm going to try and share them now. And I'll be honest, it's not working brilliantly. Let me try and... Dave, you start, and I'll keep playing.
Sure. So as bad as it is in every other industry out there at the moment, in the fixed wing industry, it makes the downturn that the helicopter industry went through post 2015 oil meltdown, and the downturn that the aviation industry went through post 9/11 look like a cakewalk. So immediately, 95% of the passengers who were flying stopped flying. It was worse than that internationally, and within the context of where we are today, it's gotten much better. Much better, meaning now they're only down 90%. So what we've seen, and Al can, there you go. What we've seen already in this short pandemic is a rash of bankruptcies. So we're up to around 20 bankruptcies within the industry. And to put this a little bit in context, commercial helicopters have about 5% of the units that commercial airplanes are, fixed wing airplanes are, and commercial helicopters have in the range of 2% of the value. So you're talking about something that's between 20 and 50 times bigger going on, and that's where all the focus has been. And as you look at these names, what happened in very quick succession is those operators who were already doing poorly, losing money, and had really bad balance sheets went away. They're liquidating. Those operators who had really bad balance sheets but were making money filed after that. And now you're seeing, for instance, LATAM is the most recent one to file. Well-capitalized companies that didn't need to file, that have filed for strategic reasons and to fix the balance sheet coming out of bankruptcy. So this is the first 20. There's more to come. And Al, if you can flip to the next slide. So liquidity has been spotty and depends on where you were based on what's happened in the pandemic. So certain places have decided, and these numbers are all done as a percentage of dollars that people have raised from various places. So it's capital sources, it's government money. There's the haves and the have-nots. So if you're a North American carrier, you're doing just fine. You're getting billions and billions of dollars. If you are certain European carriers in certain European countries, you're doing great. If you look at the spate of the bankruptcies, a lot of them are in South America, Latin American airlines, and in certain places in Europe. Those are the folks that didn't have access to money. So it really is a tale of two cities right now, depending on which city you happen to be in. And Al, if you flip to the next slide. And this just shows you geographically on a slightly different metric. It is how much money have government given to various airlines as a percentage of their annual revenues. So again, if you're in the US, if you're in France, you've gotten on average, 30% of your revenues have gone to an airline from government grants and loans. If on the other hand, you're in Latin America, you're in Africa, you're in certain parts of Asia, you've gotten 1% or less than 1% of the money in there. So we're seeing it play out where the bankruptcies are focused, where the money is not flowing. Al, the next page, please. So For those of us who went through this, this is like early 2016, where we've had the first couple of filings, but we know the dominoes are going to fall here. So airlines are starting to go and will continue to go. It's going to go to the MROs, and in the fixed wing world, the MROs are much more third party than in-house. But those that are standalone and don't have the ability to raise money are going to go on. It's going to go to the lessors. So we've got 20 large lessors that have more than half of their fleet grounded right now. And certain folks on this phone, certain of the lessors who might be listening, remember what that's like. Now, some of the leases are being paid. Some of the leases are not being paid. Some of them have been restructured, but we all know from what we learned at Waypoint that a leasing company is in essence a finance company. And at the end of the day, the money's not going to be there. The fleets are being returned. Nobody wants them back. And then finally, suppliers. It's going to be much worse in fixed wing and suppliers. If you look at our main suppliers, whether it's Sikorsky or Augusta Westland or Airbus, about 90% of the planes or 85% of the helicopters that they build are military. So it's bad when commercial goes away, but they can deal with it. It's the exact opposite in fixed wing. So the major manufacturers, 90% of what they make goes into commercial. So it's going to get bad. And we've talked over the last few years about the shape of this. This is most certainly not a V recovery, even if economies come back. This is most certainly not a U recovery. This is a bathtub. How long and wide will it be? How long will it stay where it is? But it is, absolute Armageddon for this entire value chain, and that's where a lot of the focus in the capital markets is. So, I think that's the last of my detailed slides, Al, and I can talk about whatever you'd like us to talk about.
Well, I think you got us when you said absolute Armageddon for commercial aviation. I know they're completely separate industries, and I know a lot of helicopter specialists get fed up of being compared to the commercial aviation market. But is this going to impact the rotary market? Are we going to see investors who've been burnt on commercial aviation just fleeing from anything that flies?
I don't think it hurts helicopters any worse than helicopters was hurt before based on getting burned. I think the problem is going to be competition for capital, and banks and private equity firms right now are looking at fungibility, relative value, where they're going to put their money. And so, for instance, Avianca is in Chapter 11, LATAM is in Chapter 11. All these private equity companies are going to have the opportunity to do DIP funding with all the protections of DIP funding. Then you're going to go down to, someone like Texas, who does both, or any bank that kind of does both. Would I rather own a 737-800 or put the same money into, I don't know what you think the best of the best financeable aircraft is, a 139, a 92, but having 200 airlines that fly my helicopter, my airplane type, and 50 lessors who have it and can move it around, versus deciding to spend my limited capital focusing on pick the helicopter type, pick the operator, pick the fungibility and movability of it. If they're going to focus on something with their money, I think the risk is that they're going to focus on getting outsized returns on the fixed wing side, which they haven't been able to do in, probably since 2008 when the Chinese came in full force, and doing this. So are you just going to get lost in the shuffle because I can put, $2.2 billion to work down in LATAM, and they're certainly going to come out on a DIP basis, or I can put 10 million or 20 million or 50 million to work with the same amount of headache. So I think that's the issue with getting capital at this point.
Although the argument that Crispin Maunder, executive chairman of LCI Aviation, would make is that if I invest in a helicopter, I can roughly predict and forecast that market, while at the moment we have no idea what the airline market's going to look like. So his argument is you can't, no one can tell us what the commercial market's going to look like in 3 months' time, let alone 2 years.
Well, I'll give you the most optimistic version that I've heard from anybody, and I don't think this is true. So 12 to 18 months from now, we'll hit the new normal in fixed wing, and there'll be 5% fewer passengers. I don't know anyone who thinks that it's going to be shorter than that, and I don't know anyone who thinks that it's only 5%. But in that optimistic market, there is no profitability anywhere in the value chain in fixed wing. And so, ask the folks that were involved in CHC or Bristow or PHI or Ericsson how difficult it is to restructure when you can, at least as a debtor, agree to what the future looks like and the changes you need to make. How do you, as one of these debtors, come up with a plan that you can sell to yourself and sell to your creditors to think about coming out? So we all saw CHC and PHI and Bristow focused, rightfully so, on getting out of bankruptcy as quickly as possible because it cost $8 to $10 million a month to be in bankruptcy. How do these airlines figure out how the heck to get out of bankruptcy when, as you said, nobody knows what's happening? How many of the folks on the phone here are going to get on an airplane and fly business class domestically, let alone internationally? And without that, there's no profitability for anything near where the airline industry is. So that's where the focus is now. That's where I'm spending all of my time, just because people are filing and going in, and advising in bankruptcy advisory is the best way to actually be able to make money in fixed wing aviation. And so that's where we all are. And all of the other advisors that were involved in any of the restructurings, that's where they're spending 100% of their time.
I was going to say, I don't remember you saying how expensive it is being in bankruptcy when you worked at Seabury. Okay, so you were at Bristow. You spent a lot of time in this space on CHC, Waypoint, looking around. What do you see happening in the helicopter market in the next 12 months?
The same as the previous speaker said, it's the same issues that we've had. And as your speaker said in the last one, it's the exact same issues that we had, right? There needs to be a rationalization in all of the operators. There needs to be a fundamental change in the difference or the relationship between clients and providers. To be fair, in the oil and gas space, I think utility space has it a lot better. I think the medical space has their issues as well, but there has to be a fundamental difference in business. You are asking investors to take a long-term view on a 25-year asset, whether I'm an operator, whether I'm a lessor, whether I'm a private equity fund, with clients that are huge, and they have 30, 60, 90 days out. And 6 guys show up and make every single bid, and people are still chasing it until those fundamental things change. I don't know how you fix this and make this make sense from an investor perspective, especially now that there's opportunities to put that money in other similar places where it's not as irrational.
So, final question: do you see any of that happening in the next year?
Well, I'm very interested in seeing the combination of Bristow era. Let's knock wood that happens. I'm very interested in seeing how the new owners of PHI decide to move forward, and how other operators in Europe decide to move forward. I don't see that happening until folks are forced to do it, and I don't know that anyone's acting at the moment like they're forced to do anything. And until such time, I don't see it changing until the folks that have their money in there decide and are operating decide to actually make the changes. So I don't see the impetus short of Chapter 22s if and when they ever show up.
Okay, on that cheery ending, thanks so much, David Fowkes, Managing Director, Sector Co-Head, Aviation Aerospace, Raymond James. Thanks, David. Great seeing you.
Thank you.
Okay, so we've had finance and values. It's time to get down to the proper stuff that keeps helicopters flying, maintenance. We're delighted to, the real stuff that we always forget about and talk about. We're delighted to have Pedro Clode, founder of Helicopter Consulting.
Thank you.
Pedro's an expert in maintenance. He worked at Heli Portugal, Heli Bravo, and Babcock before launching his own consulting firm, where his clients include Heli Bravo, Heli Portugal, Babcock, and NHV. Pedro, how are you?
I'm all right. Thank you. Thank you for your invitation, Alastair. And how are you?
I'm good, thanks. It's great to have you.
Thank you.
So, Pedro, you've been in Spain, which shut down first. How hard has it been managing maintenance during the lockdown?
Well, Alastair, we are not. Well, our service is related to camo and maintenance, and also Part 21. And in Spain, well, we don't provide support actually to Babcock Spain. So far, is Babcock Portugal. We have Babcock Portugal. They do the firefighting and HAMS. So we are providing support for them. So I don't know how to answer the question regarding to Spain. So
how's it been generally? How are your clients been coping with lockdowns, and has it been extremely hard to keep helicopters flying?
Well, I believe that I mean for the last 4 months more or less, I believe that the companies who had the problem with the, I mean for the remote services, they thought that what was really a luxury to have a consulting support. They thought that they have their own camo support in the department. So I think that in the future, after this COVID situation, I think that these companies will look brighter and will have more opportunities ahead. So I think yes, there will be good times ahead. Of course, everybody's struggling now at least the last few months, and let's see what happens after.
Are you seeing, I know you work across a range of industries and you support offshore and VIP firefighting. What demand are you seeing from customers? Are they, or what sort of utilization are you seeing?
Right. Well, the demands that we are most getting are from offshore, windmill, firefighting, and HMS industries. Mostly tasks that previously could be done remotely. Now we are doing the same. And also, we also are Part 21 reseller, and of course, the most important is that we are getting more demand are the modifications associated with COVID-19 HMS, for example.
Do you get involved in storing helicopters?
Storing? No.
Okay, so you haven't seen a trend there?
No, not yet.
Which is good. So how optimistic are you about the next 12 months?
Well, I'm quite optimistic, to be honest. For the next 12 months, firefighting will still be active. HMS also, and search and rescue. I believe some companies are changing their mindsets, like I told you, regarding the remote job. But now I think COVID-19 is changing all that, pushing people to work remotely from their homes. In fact, I read an article somewhere that the situation forced technology leap in this way. So I believe that these companies must adapt to this new reality and bet on the remote for the next 12 months. Therefore, I believe remote support can be seen with better eyes, and demand can increase in the future. And also, I feel quite optimistic regarding this Part 21 reseller. Like I told you, mainly to HMS related for the next months. We are, and we can help helicopter companies in modifying these helicopters with COVID-19 modifications. With their feedback, of course, we can also improve our products and our services as well.
There's in the last few years, there's been a lot of talk about a shortage of pilots and maintenance technicians, and with airlines cutting staff Is this an opportunity for the helicopter industry?
Well, the maintenance is always a thing regarding to lack of technicians. It's quite hard to get the right staff, and also the camo is the same thing. Well, at least is my point of view and my experience. That's the main reason that I founded this consulting firm, is to provide support in the camo. From my experience, the companies that I work for have a problem to get the right staff in the camo. But yes, answering directly to your question, I think regarding to technicians, yes, would be a good bet. For the pilots, well, let's see what happens. Let's see what happens.
That's great. Thank you so much, Pedro. Really great having you.
Thank you.
Pedro, Ken and Clode, founder of Helicopter Consulting. Thank you very much. Okay, and now on screen already, perfectly on timed, we're delighted to have Jeremy Parkin of Parapex Media. Jeremy has been in the industry as long as Sharon, I think. Following the helicopter industry closely for over 35 years. He tracks production data, sales, leases, and contracts right around the world. In fact, he tracks every airframe right around the world. He founded the world's first helicopter news website back in 1999, and he owns HeliHub, as well as doing his aviation market intelligence work, the hardest working helicopter journalist in the market. Jeremy, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you, Al. Good to speak.
Great. What are your thoughts on the general state of the different markets?
I think what characterises the markets for me is the fact that we're moving more towards contracts and longer contracts, which will help us see us through this downturn in the market and should help the industry survive. I mean, the single turbine market is going to be hit really hard. I think the twin market will be hit less hard and will come through quicker.
You caught me at the ending. Do you want to talk about the delivery statistics from the first quarter? How significant are they?
It's difficult to say, actually. When Gamma puts out these numbers every quarter, I'm not sure every OEM has quite as much commitment to them as Gamma would like, and they each take a different view on how they present their numbers. I mean, this time the first quarter numbers from Airbus was literally just a total figure. They didn't break it down by model like they have done every quarter before. And Sikorsky seems to only provide an end of year number and not the individual quarters. But if you take the main four OEMs, I mean, Airbus were the only ones to maintain their output in terms of airframe numbers, and also the only one to maintain their dollar booking numbers, their total billings. Both Bell and Leonardo came in with numbers pretty much close on half the number of airframes they delivered in Q1 of 2019, and Sikorsky returned a zero figure, but as I said, that's probably because they're only going to report at the end of the year. But if you look at Leonardo being in North Italy was where one of the early places that went into lockdown, and one of the early areas hit badly by the pandemic. I wouldn't read too much into the sudden downturn for Leonardo because they were hit then. But I think all manufacturers will show a near zero number for Q2. I mean, I'm expecting that the Q2 numbers will look dire, to be polite.
Which actually, demand's fallen, so it's not such a bad thing for the industry. I know it's not great for the OEMs, but it means at least the production rate slowed down to match the demand for those months.
Yes, but I mean they can't slow production down quite that quickly. I mean, it's obviously if you're looking at something like a car production line with much bigger unit numbers, you can understand it. But I mean, when you've got such a big asset as an aircraft, it's very difficult to suddenly stop. And by that token, you've also got situations where there's a backlog in which could be anything. I mean, if you want to order an Airbus 145 right now, you're going to wait 18 months for it. So they're actually planning their production that far out.
Okay, we've got some questions from the audience. Question from my friend and colleague Terry Spruce. Do you think older helicopters will still be around after the pandemic?
I think that there'll be a gradual shift, and they're not going to suddenly go away, the older types, but I think it will be an opportunity that the manufacturers will take to move on. I mean, there's still one or two 155s and Dauphins coming off the line, but that's pretty much stopped, and Airbus will want to move everyone in that market towards the 160. I think the other manufacturers, they're not in a position to move on to different products quite yet, and I think quite a few of them are adapting towards the eVTOL market, but that's so far further down the line that it's not part of this conversation.
It can be, but I like these. Okay, here's another question from Roy Corsi. Can anyone comment about the trend of helicopter utilization across the oil and gas industry for the next 12 to 18 months?
The oil and gas industry for me is an interesting one. I mean, we've got a situation where there's approximately 30 S-92s sitting completely idle around the world, and quite a few which are doing very few hours. But we've also got, but when I was writing the country profiles for Asian Sky Media of all the Far East countries around New Year, one of the particular trends that I picked up was an announcement that the Chinese government wanted to double their oil production within 5 years. Now, they're not going to manage that without good support of helicopters, and we're gradually seeing some of the ones which are being mothballed, wrapped up in plastic and so on, are being shipped over in that direction and gradually being put back into use. So there are some older ones which have been stored, which are moving on. There's also older types, the likes of S-76s, Dauphins maybe, which we will gradually see withdrawing from the market. I mean, there's lots of 76s being withdrawn for parts, as you've covered on the last call, and was also mentioned back when we had the event in London. Remember that bizarre event where we were actually able to see each other face to face and shake people's hands?
That's many years ago. And it's crazy we'll ever get back to that. Question from Alison Chambers. We are seeing fixed wing companies add heli AOCs to their portfolio, e.g. Gamma Aviation, which has had a Scottish Air Ambulance contract for a while, I think. And Heli Air's added a fixed wing AOC. Is this a trend?
I think that's one really good way that operators should be adapting. I mean, if companies that aren't able to adapt are going to be the ones that lose out. I mean, Gamma has held that contract with the Scottish Ambulance Service for a significant number of years, and actually subcontracted the helicopter aspect to Bond, now Babcock, for at least the last 15, 20 years. So that they're actually taking it back from Babcock midway through a contract period. But it's interesting that they're making a play in that market. They're also making a play more towards military. Gamma are also saying they want to get into the wind farm market as well. So a company that has been traditionally known as starting with Beech King Airs and operating many jets and intercontinental corporate jets is making a move into the helicopter market.
Okay. Okay, finally, how do you think the rest of the year is going to look generally, or the next 12 months for the industry?
I think it's going to be a lot quieter, but coming back to my point about contracts, there's still going to need to be deliveries of new helicopters to actually fulfill some of the contracts that have already been signed. I mean, we've got NHV are taking over the Babcock contracts out of Blackpool on the RSC from the 1st of December. They've got 1169 that's currently on lease in Germany, which they'll be bringing across, and they'll need a new one from the production line. So Leonardo are presumably contracted to deliver it by a certain date, and they'll need to fulfill that.
So it's not all bad news. You're still optimistic.
I'm still optimistic for the current model twins on the production lines. I think older aircraft will get retired a little sooner. I think the single turbine market will be hit much harder.
And if anyone else wants more information, you're very happy to do a bespoke report for them.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much, Jeremy.
Thank you.
Parkin, founder of Parapex Media. Thank you. Cheers. Okay, it's nice to have two Alastairs on screen. Doesn't happen very often.
One spelled correctly. No, okay.
I know you. I don't know what went wrong with yours, with a T in yours. Delighted to have Alastair Fallon. The T is pronounced like a D. Helicopter aviation analyst at IBA Group. Alastair's been at IBA Group since 2015 and is responsible for their helicopter appraisals. He's got 30 years, you don't look old enough, of aviation experience in both civilian and military operations. He was an officer in the RAF before entering academia and then IBA. Okay, Alastair, we just talked to Jeremy about the delivery figures for Q1. What's your thoughts on orders?
Orders, I think that there does exist a backlog, but I think as was mentioned, that is sort of tailored to the need, and that can be slowed down, as and when. But really, at the end of the day, production will continue as best it can. Production of these helicopters will continue. I think it was mentioned if you want an H145. You're going to wait 18 months before you get one. Now, production isn't going to stop because of the current state. Production on that particular type will continue, and they'll be delivered as and when they're available. Obviously, the OEM and the buyer, they will possibly be in negotiation about delivery, etc. And that is sometimes slowed down. I think they can negotiate that between themselves.
Do you see lessors having more role or a diminished role at the moment?
Probably in the past, they've certainly 4 or 5 years ago, they were probably one of the bigger buyers. So the OEMs and the industry as a whole would rely on those sort of orders to pick them up. So they would sort of fill the need. The lessors, as far as operational, I think the operators will be looking closer at lessors than OEMs to replenish their fleets as and when, to replace their older stock possibly. So they'll be more interested in leasing than buying. I think certainly at this stage in this environment and the sort of cyclical industry we're in, it's sort of very, very high at times when all is good, but it can very quickly sink once again. So we keep on going through these circles and cycles, and that may never change.
Okay, we've got some questions from the audience. Here's one from Kenneth Swartz. What would the impact be on helicopter parts pricing by the OEMs as new aircraft sales slow? So we all know how important the aftermarket is to OEMs.
Well, I would imagine in order to keep the older helicopters going, there is going to be more demand for parts. Therefore, the price will undoubtedly go with the need, I suppose. So yeah, helicopter parts and pricing will undoubtedly go with the market, and probably up. There'll be more demand, so there may be more price expected for these parts.
I think the OEMs will like that answer. Sharon Desfor is more blunt. She's saying upward pressure, of course. Have you ever known the OEMs to reduce parts prices, reduce being in
Oh
careful.
no, I'm being nicely neutral as best I can.
Yeah, I know. I think I think cynics would say that they're more likely to put parts up to try and make money from another revenue stream. But I'm not saying that. Question from David Crick, we're sticking with the appraisers. With helis having a lesser range than fixed wing aircraft and being mission specific, will they bounce back more quickly than the fixed wing market, even though it's a global economy?
I don't think they're going to take a hit quite the way the fixed wing has. As we can see, a huge number of fixed wing transport jets parked around the world. Now these aircraft have got nothing to do when nobody wants to fly. The big business in fixed wing is when they're flying people around the world. Well, we're on a lockdown. We can't go anywhere. If we go somewhere, then we can't come back. We come back, then we have to go into. We have to lock ourselves up for a couple of weeks somewhere else. So no, helicopters don't. I honestly don't believe helicopters can be directly related to the impact felt by fixed wing. Helicopters are particularly specialist. They're always going to be a need for them, and funding comes from elsewhere. It doesn't come from people on seats. So bums on seats is a term I think we can all refer to. I don't think people are paying for transport particularly, but we're paying for the specialist role that these helicopters fill, and we hear about it every day. So the high end of helicopters, from search and rescue to EMS to, I guess, support of the offshore industry will be ongoing and continual. So they are all very specialist. So there are things that do affect them, but I wouldn't compare them directly with fixed wing.
Okay, but we're going to ask another question. This is from Mike Francis. Is interest in VIP helicopters following what's being seen in the fixed wing market? I think Mike's talking about the fixed wing business jet market rather than the commercial aviation market. Do you?
Yes, I mean it's quite interesting. I did read something else today. There was a company, I think they do operate in Australia, and they're actually increasing the number of sort of VIP transport helicopters that are moving people from one part of Australia to another. Naturally, these are in well, I said VIP, but possibly executive. So people that want to travel from A to B, they don't want to travel with many other people in case of, I suppose, COVID-19 and sharing air with so many people. There is actually a need and a want for that class of helicopter. So they've actually gone up. So passenger transport has gone up. So I think we can see that hasn't been affected. That's probably gone fractionally higher.
Okay, going back to you got a question from Steve Robertson, who was on last time. How are you factoring reduction in demand for rotorcraft in offshore missions into your valuation work?
Yeah, I mean that's really interesting, and I have to pay careful attention to all the information I get, particularly from Air and Sea Analytics and other similar bodies. So there is lots of information about the utilization of these helicopters. We're going through phases, and when you compare with last year, we've heard all sorts of news, and yes, I do truly believe that it is down. It's drastically down on 12 months ago for this period, so I do have to take that into account. Now, when I'm doing evaluation and as an appraiser, I have to consider what the current market value might be. So I have to consider, well, what are they worth in the market today? If you wanted to sell it today, well, could you actually sell it today for what it's worth? And I don't genuinely think people are going to buy on a price considering that today. They're buying on what they might need in the future. So the actual price wouldn't go directly with the number of helicopters being utilized. So yeah, we've heard 30 S92s parked up somewhere around the world. Well, all these things have to be brought into consideration. There's current market value, but then you have a slightly longer term base value, which gives a little direction to what the helicopters might be worth towards the end of their lives. So there still is some value in the helicopter.
And in defense of Sikorsky, I'd like to say other types are very much available too.
Apologies, yes.
No, it's not you. Alastair Fallon, helicopter aviation analyst at IBA Group. Thanks so much for joining us.
Welcome.
Thank you. We're now delighted to have Jason Kmiecik from President of HeliValue, who also has the world's worst broadband.
Can you hear me?
I can. How are you?
Okay, good. Thanks for the invites, and I apologize for the internet. My upload speeds are so bad I cannot upload any type of video. So it's been a little bit difficult working from home.
And we're also assuming we've only got you until a bird lands on the line outside your house, and then you're gone.
That's what happens when you got your internet running off of a hotspot.
What Jason, I know Sharon's told us, your colleague Sharon has told us not to talk about oil and gas, but how are you, going back to Steve's question, how are you factoring in demand for reduced demand for offshore rotorcraft into your valuations?
Honestly, the offshore demand for valuations as well as resales of helicopters today has tremendously slowed down. There's not a whole lot going on at all pertaining to movement of these aircraft. There's been a lot of restrictions pertaining to the coronavirus, moving aircraft in and out of countries. So that's definitely hurt a lot of things. But just the uncertainty of the future of oil has kind of got a lot of people a little hesitant on pulling the plug to purchase more aircraft. Lessors are still predominantly the major player in supplying aircraft these days, since nobody has any capital to go out and actually buy one. So that's also playing a huge role.
Okay, you've had Richard Berkemeyer saying that you're working from a fishing boat, which I know is not true. Ed Wishecker has thrown up a nice, easy question. Appraisers don't seem to put out values that represent what you can sell it for today. What is the relationship supposed to be? Is the appraisal supposed to be 10% more, 50% more? How do we use appraisals if they're not what you can realize for the asset?
There are 100 different answers to that question, and it's depending on the situation. You can look at a reference guide, you can look at an appraisal. Everything's going to have a different purpose. So depending on what you're looking at is kind of the question that needs to be asked. The reference guides are generally there to represent where the current market has been selling. We can only represent what has transacted, not what is going to transact. So a lot of, Ed, I'm assuming a lot of your, forward look into that question is pertaining to 76s with your current situation with the part outs. That is definitely a kind of a twist with what values are showing today. Mainly a lot of part outs don't go for anything that's published online. You can take 100% value, and typically you might get maybe a little bit lower than that in some cases. But I still think that values, appraised values are still representative of what things are selling for today. I just saw you punch in there about the 92s. 92s is probably one of the most difficult topics to discuss in helicopters today, and it's kind of pushing into many other models as well, pertaining to what is transacting on the market today versus what lease rates are going for, and that's one of the what do you say here?
You're getting heckled live on air by Ed.
Well, Ed, there's actually been a lot of sales that have been lower than the $6.5 million mark. So if you want to go there, or lower than the $4 million mark, I should say. So yes, these are a little bit specific. A lot of these aircraft are not normal transactions. We've got one lessor that's pretty much buying up everything on the market, whether it's going to be operated or parted out. So it's kind of a unique situation. It's very limited, and the data that's out there is very limited to those aircraft as well. So it's thanks, Ed. That's what we strive for. But
anyone watching the replay, Ed has been saying we have seen 6 sell for million to 6.5 million, yet appraisal for these same assets more than double, but HeliValue is the closest to reality. So, I'm sure this is long set up.
Yeah, I mean, I'm aware of pretty much every transaction that has taken place over the past year with the 92s. There's been more than 6 aircraft that have sold, and some of them have actually sold for quite a bit higher. There's not all of that information is very, very difficult to gather. A lot of people don't know about it, so there's definitely a higher side to those numbers than what you're showing there, Ed. But there's also a lower side to those numbers as well, depending on the aircraft and how long it's been sitting on the market and what it's going to be used for.
That was the perfect appraiser's answer. There's a higher side, but there's also a lower side to your number. Sharon was pretty optimistic. What's your view? Are there any areas that you're getting particular interest from financiers or people coming into the market?
Yeah, I got a couple different sides to that question. The optimistic side as well as the opposite of that. So
another appraiser thing.
Yeah, on the positive side of it, we're seeing a lot of EMS utility firefighting stuff coming in today. There's a lot of EMS refis as well as new purchases. Well, not as much new purchases, but there's still a lot of orders that have been placed a year or two ago that they're taking deliveries and they're still looking for financing. So we are seeing that. We're also seeing a select few models that are thriving in the market today, and I don't necessarily think it's based on the coronavirus as well as the oil crisis or anything else. I think that there's a major shift in EMS aircraft today. Pertaining to mainly medium aircraft are predominantly the EC series, the 135s, 145s. We're seeing more of the more demand going into the 169s, but we're seeing a huge downfall of anything outside those aircraft, pertaining to the 155s, the 365s, any of the other aircraft that are kind of falling a little bit to the wayside in pretty much every application as well. As for the single aircraft, the 407s and the A-Stars are pretty much the go-to singles. Anything else is kind of, again, falling to the wayside. But utility aircraft as well. Utility, you've got your singles, and you still have your old twins. Your 212s and 205s. There's still demand for those things, and honestly, I think there's going to be demand going out very far, just because they're beat up pickup trucks and they get up and go to work every morning, and they don't have to deal with all the electronics and the avionics that the new aircraft have. So I think that those are good. As for offshore, like I said before, it's very quiet. Things are definitely being put on hold right now for those aircraft. We're seeing a lot of calls from banks and financiers about taking a quick peek at what's going on with their values of those assets, because some of them are getting very very worried about what could happen in the near future. But what does it say? If anybody's heard the word F-28 in the past year, I'd be surprised. But yeah,
you and Sharon can have this conversation offline.
Yeah, there's still definitely very positive parts of the market that are out there. It's just the stuff that mainly this conference doesn't really focus on, pertaining to the small guys.
Okay, and yeah, I think Alastair Fallon's answering Brian's question. Okay, Jason, final, nice, easy answer. When are we going to see the helicopter market turn upwards? When are we going to name the turning point?
Honestly, there's been so many people speculate on the last downturn, and every single person's been wrong that I don't even want to say a number, just because there's so many key factors that go into it. And with the way that the model or the market has shifted with models, there's no telling what's going to be, the new tomorrow aircraft. I mean, the 139 has pretty much dominated the entire medium class helicopter for offshore, as well as some other platforms. So nobody really predicted that, and especially Bell.
Okay. And on that note, thanks so much, Jason. Great to have Jason, president of HeliValue. Thanks so much.
Thank
and
you.
I'm amazed your Wi-Fi held out. That's just, I think we should stop now. Thanks so much to all of our speakers. Just very quickly, let's look at the poll. How optimistic you're about 2020? Last time we did this, 29.9% were fairly optimistic. Now it's 42.6%. And 52% were fairly pessimistic. So, that's a slight change. I think this is and also a lot less people are very pessimistic. That's halved. So that's got to be good news. And it's nice to see we're coming out of the downturn. The final question to answer, Richard Berkemeyer has said, will you be holding a helicopter conference shortly? We've polled that as well as we've been going along. And I wouldn't say that with 43% saying no, I think we need to convince you all more before we announce it. It's something we'll look at, but I think like many of you, I think we'd rather be meeting in one place, although it does feel like 10 years since we ran Helicopter Invest in London. Thanks so much to all our speakers and everyone who's taken part. It's amazing to have 300 people online for this. And it's great seeing so many people coming together in the chat. If you'd like to take part in the next one, please let us know. It will be in July. I think we're going to do one of these once a month for now. And apart from that, stay safe. Have a nice evening or morning or afternoon, wherever you are. And we look forward to seeing you all soon. Thank you very much and goodbye.